Cloverfield Paradox is the third installment of the Cloverfield anthology series, and not only was this film originally supposed to come out in April of this year and in theaters, but during the Super Bowl we all saw that ad that said not only is it coming out on Netflix, but it's also coming out tonight right now, and everyone of course went out on Netflix to watch it after the big game, myself included in that, because in case you didn't see my 10 Cloverfield Lane review, not only do I love that film, but I also really love the first Cloverfield film, and I'm so happy to be living in a time where they're actually branching off and making more Cloverfield films, because when I saw the first Cloverfield movie I was like 12, and I saw that and I was like, I'm so surprised they haven't made more Cloverfield movies yet. Now we're finally getting more, so I couldn't be happier with that. To keep this movie rather vague for you guys, because we literally only have one Super Bowl ad, this film is about a group of scientists aboard this space station called the Cloverfield who are testing out this particle accelerator that is supposed to solve a depleting resource problem on Earth. After one attempt, though, stuff starts to go wrong for them, and things get a little weird with themselves, the ship, space-wise, Earth-wise, timeline, dimension-wise. It just gets really weird from there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of Cloverfield, and I'm a big fan of this idea of making more Cloverfield anthology films. And this movie seems to have a lot going for it because it's the same production team, Bad Robot, behind it. It's not like they sold it off to a different company. You have two screenwriters. One of them worked on 22 Jump Street, and the other worked on the most recent Star Trek Beyond film with Simon Pegg. And you have a first-time director on this film, kind of similar to what they did with Dan Trachtenberg with 10 Cloverfield Lane. A great cast involved, and that Super Bowl ad showed a lot of promise. So of course after that ad premiered and it was officially announced that it was coming online as soon as the game was over, I was hyped. I was pacing around the room. I couldn't wait for the game to end just to watch this film. And of course, as per usual with the internet now, this movie has a lot of people divided. You have some people that actually did really enjoy this movie. You have some people that do straight up hate it though, on that end of the extreme. Then you have some people who are more on the fence, maybe not quite sure how to think of it, or maybe they just think it's okay. And I'm kind of with them on this. I feel like after this review, I want to watch this film one more time just to see if my opinion still stands. After I watched the movie, I felt like I definitely needed to think it over a bit because my thoughts weren't exactly clear. I think I've thought about it long enough, though, to make this video. Maybe my thoughts will change if I watch it a second time, but for right now, this is what I have for you guys as far as my opinion on this film. After thinking about it for pretty much the entire night, I stayed up late watching this movie and then I thought about it and woke up in the morning, continued to think about it. And I do want to mention the good stuff first. I want to get that out of the way because this film isn't awful. This movie has some good things to offer. One of them being that the direction is quite good. Julius Ona, sorry if I mispronounced it, he did a very good job working on this film. Even though it goes straight to Netflix, I think this movie could have actually worked if we did see it on the big screen because its visual presentation is outstanding. Some really fantastic visual effects that you wouldn't really expect to see on Netflix. You also have really great set design with this space station, some really great cinematography and lighting, and also a great musical score from Bear McCreary, who is returning from 10 Cloverfield Lane, that really accompanies some of the tension you get from certain thrilling sequences that, once again, very well helmed. I was definitely antsy during certain moments in this film involving some of the tension. So from a technical perspective, directing, cinematography, and all that, this movie is very good in that regard. Also, another thing that I liked about this movie, the cast. The ensemble does a very good job, especially the main girl, Gugu Bathara. I think that's how you pronounce the last name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, but she was definitely the most fleshed out character in the film. She has a past, and she definitely has an arc to overcome. And also, Chris O'Dowd, he's playing a more comedic relief character. Certain lines that he said, including one that had me rolling. I don't know if it was their intention to have me laughing as much as I did, but just the way he said it I loved. Like, as a comedic relief character, I think he really worked. Everyone in this movie did a very good job with their performances. And to kind of close out my thoughts as far as the good, I was definitely intrigued throughout this film. It didn't really drag in any specific areas. This movie didn't feel like it was going by too quickly. It had a steady, intriguing pace that I was constantly thinking about during the film. However, let's shift into the cons here. I think this movie has a little bit of an ambition problem. Its ambitions were a little bit greater than its execution overall. This movie is trying to be three different things. One thing is tying it into the Cloverfield universe. That was one thing that they were promoting like last night for like an hour, is that this movie is going to explain certain things in the Cloverfield series. And of course, that could work. You also have a story of a smart sci-fi film where they're dealing with paradoxes and different dimensions and how that affects what these characters are going through, and that also could have worked. And then you also have the third thing, which is just another claustrophobic survival space film where the science is more the antagonist than a xenomorph or a Calvin from Life. And all three of these ideas I think would have worked perfectly on their own, but when you bring them together for this film at least, I don't think it all necessarily paid off. This movie is a little bit too convoluted with some of the stuff it has going on. It brings up certain questions that do need answering, and there are certain things about the premise that will explain it, but then there's other things that I can't really spoil where I'm asking like, well, how did this happen though, and what about this, that don't really get an answer from the film. It's left very unclear. There's also certain things plot hole wise, considering the other Cloverfield movie. The timeline isn't very certain at this point. There's definitely room for multiple new interpretations on what this whole series is at this point, and that's fine. This whole series is kind of built up on ambiguity. My problem though is that on its own, if you were just to watch this as its own film, it doesn't really work. The first Cloverfield movie, you can watch that and just kind of think like, alright, that was a fun, like, found footage monster film. 10 Cloverfield Lane, if you didn't see Cloverfield, you probably wouldn't even know that this was supposed to be involved with that series, but you could still watch it and think that was a really great thriller. This film, however, doesn't really stand on its own. It really does rely on certain knowledge you would have about the first film's events. And as I said earlier, that's not necessarily a bad thing if they were going straight up sequel route, but they are still trying to keep it very vague. You can tell that this movie was something else before the Cloverfield idea came into play. There are certain sequences that feel more like reshoots after 10 Cloverfield Lane did very well. I can't confirm that that's what happened, but due to the delays this film had because it was supposed to come out in 2017, I can definitely see that being very true. And also because of the new additions to this series and certain things that had me thinking like, well, how can this work in Cloverfield now? And when I wasn't thinking about the Cloverfield timeline, I was also trying to keep track of what was going on with our main characters, because these characters are very bland, not very well done. At least in Life, that is an Alien ripoff film, with characters that aren't amazing or anything, but they gave them personalities, and through an opening scene where they're all interacting together, you get a clear sense of who they all are as individuals. This film has a moment where they could have done that, but because it was an opening credit sequence, they muted their dialogue and just let them talk without you actually hearing them, understanding who their personality traits are. And when the movie actually does start and they end that, it feels like you're being dropped off like right in the middle of their story. And that doesn't really work when these characters are going to be in suspense and you need to care for them, and the movie didn't really try that much to really do that for you. Even the main character, who is the most fleshed out, as I said earlier, when her arc is going down in the film, when they're going through that, it really doesn't feel that satisfactory. Mary Elizabeth Winstead in 10 Cloverfield Lane, she has an arc. Like, she's fleshed out, she has her own personality, and she's just a great actress in general, that she made this character work, and by the end of the film, there is a satisfaction to be had there because her character went through her own personal journey. The main character in this film could have had that, and you could tell they were trying to do that, but when it gets to the end of the movie, it doesn't feel that satisfactory. And also the other characters, some of them have their own little subplots that are kind of impacting the plot, but that just kind of makes the movie feel a little bit too convoluted for its own good. Like, I was sitting there thinking like, wait, what was this character's thing again? Like, I kind of forgot. And it kind of builds into this overall theme of how I felt about the movie, is that its ambitions for its storytelling and fitting into the Cloverfield universe were just much bigger than what they should have just ended up doing, which is make their own really great sci-fi film, like 10 Cloverfield Lane, that maybe has like maybe one attachment to the first Cloverfield movie. Because although I would be really in for a straight up sequel where they explain certain things that happened in the first Cloverfield movie, I think this idea of Cloverfield anthology movies like 10 Cloverfield Lane is very interesting in and of itself. And as I said earlier, this movie is very interesting, but it's a little too convoluted for its own good, and it gets a little too hard to follow as well. And although I was very intrigued throughout, there was that part of me thinking like, I wish I could get attached to this movie much more than I already am. Overall, though, I don't think this movie is bad. The direction is very good for a first-timer. There's some good thrilling sequences. There's a good score from Bear McCreary, some really great visual effects and visual appeal to the film. And as I said earlier, the performances are great, but the characters in and of themselves aren't that strong, and during certain thrilling sequences, though they are really good, how much better would it have been if you actually cared about the characters more? How much more thrilling would the film be in that sense? How much more interested in the plot would you be if you cared more for the characters, and if they took their time to make sure you have a firm grasp on who they are as individuals before just dropping them off in the plot. I'm going to give the Cloverfield Paradox a C+. I would still recommend that you see this because it is a Cloverfield movie that is out now on Netflix, and that's amazing how they released this, but a great release stunt as this film had doesn't really make up for the fact that the characters could have been better and the story could have been a little bit more tighter as far as what it had to do. Certain things could have been cut out of the film to make it just a little bit more cohesive. And although I am still excited for another Cloverfield movie, apparently their next film, Overlord, that's coming out in like October of this year, is the next Cloverfield movie, which of course I'm interested in. I'm just hoping that it doesn't turn out like this. I'm hoping that it's more like 10 Cloverfield Lane, where maybe you can get one callback to the original, but have it be its own unique sci-fi story. Because although I'm not opposed to them making a straight-up sequel to Cloverfield, the way they tried to do it with this one, where they tried to keep that own original idea, but also tie it back to Cloverfield, it just kind of created a film too muddled for its own good. But what are your thoughts on this film? Leave in the comments below what you thought of it, because I know that this film is a little divisive right now. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.